In this section of notes, we're going to be looking at the history and government of East Asia. We're going to start out by looking at ancient East Asia and their cultural hearths. We're then going to look at the Chinese dynasties and the dynastic cycle and how that process worked throughout time and how it was very, very similar. We're then going to look at Korea and Japan, kind of their traditional type of governments that they adopted essentially from China. We're then going to look at how the West contacted and affected this region, even though there wasn't a whole lot of effect from the West. We did have spheres of influence from the West. And then we're going to look at modern East Asia, kind of how China adopted a communist government, as well as how Japan transformed from this traditional culture to a world power today. And finally, we're going to end by briefly looking at the Korean War, and then ending with how Mongolia is a democracy today. This section, we're going to look at the history and government. First, I want to look at ancient East Asia. Much of modern China encompasses the cultural hearth of the past. And what I'm referring to by the cultural hearth is the center from which ideas and practices diffuse or spread to surrounding areas. And the cultural hearth of this region was in between the Huanghe, we've been calling it the Yellow River, and the Yangtze River. That's where this cultural hearth was located, from which ideas spread to other parts of Asia. This is their ancient river valley civilization. Now I want to look at China's dynasties. They began around the Yellow River Valley civilization, as you can see here, by the kind of horizontal shaded lines. The first one I want to look at is the Shang dynasty. A dynasty is referring to a ruling family. The Shang were the first to keep records. Like all dynasties, they faced rebellions by local lords, attacks by Central Asian nomads, and natural disasters. The Zhou dynasty was next, and you can see I have the horizontal yellow line on the chart to the left. In the Zhou dynasty, Confucius, or his name was Confuzi. He was around during this time period, and he founded a system of thought based on discipline and moral conduct, which was called Confucianism. Again, it's a system of thought. It's a philosophy. It's not a religion. It's a way to live your life. And you might have seen some of the Confucius say quotes, which a lot of people look at and think are pretty funny. Another thinker, his name was Lao Tzu, founded Taoism. Taoism is a philosophy of living in simplicity and harmony with nature. All of these dynasties came through and created the dynastic cycle. The dynastic cycle was the cycle that all dynasties went through. At the beginning, everybody was happy. There started to be a period of decline. Maybe that was just the economy is not doing very well. Maybe there's some natural disasters that got us there. And then we get to a period of really bad unrest. The economy is tanked, not doing well at all. About this time period, you have rebellions. You have somebody trying to take over. And they believe that if the gods allow somebody to take over, then they have the mandate of heaven, which is they have the gods in their favor, and so a new government will take over, and they will start to do better. They will start to make more and more people happy, and there'll be a period of wealth. This is at the beginning times of the new dynasty, and then it'll go through the same cycle, have a little bit of unrest, natural disaster, economy start doing a little bit worse, and it'll get bad. And about that time period, if the gods want it, a new dynasty will overthrow. There'll be a revolt, and we'll start to get better, and we'll get even better. This cycle continues and continues with all of the different dynasties. Under the Qin, which you can see highlighted here, Shi Huangdi in the 200s BC started building the Great Wall. And that's kind of in the pieced together black lines over here on this map. And then under the Han and Tang dynasties, they expanded not only the Great Wall, but they also expanded Chinese culture into other different parts. And you can see the Han took it all the way out here to the borders of this green. region. Now looking at Korea and Japan. Buddhism spread into this region on the Silk Road. The Silk Road was an exchange route of goods and culture that stretched across Asia all the way into ancient Greece. By AD 1300, China seized control of Korea and implemented Confucianism, which became the model of government and the model of life. The Japanese were in turn influenced by the Koreans, who were influenced by the Chinese, so the Japanese, in effect, were also influenced by the Chinese. Yoritomo Minamoto, Japan's first shogun, or military ruler, helped lead the Japanese young government. Supporting the shogun were samurai, or professional warriors. And this culture system of the shogun and the samurai lasted all the way until World War II. That's when we really start to see it disappear. Contact with the West. By the 1600s, Western countries set up shipping routes, hoping to get silk and tea from this area, as those were hot commodities. China resisted this in the beginning, but in 1834, they opened up Guangzhou to limited trade. You could see Guangzhou on this map in the southern portion here, just circled in white. Might not have been the best color, but you could see its location in the southern portion there of China. After the opening of Guangzhou and the success that they had, the Europeans pushed even more, and by the 1890s, European governments and the Japanese forced what was called spheres of influence on China. Spheres of influence were areas in which they had exclusive trading rights to the region and to the people, and the Chinese government, communist government, could not do anything about it. And you could see their location. The British had areas around Tibet, Nepal, and then this corridor here. The French, even a little bit further south, had these locations that they could trade with. And even the Japanese in the southeast, which the Japanese will invade this region and conquer this region here in a little bit. And Russia also has some spheres of influence kind of towards their border of the Manchurian Plain, as well as in Mongolia. Modern East Asia, Revolutionary China. In 1911, revolution ended the empires and ended kind of the dynastic cycle in China. And in 1927, a guy who, I'll highlight his picture there, his name was Chiang Kai-shek, formed the nationalist government in China, which was more of a democratic type of government. Even though he was leading by military force, he was kind of pushing a democratic type of government. And then in 1949, the guy pictured to the left, Mao Zedong, through civil war, won with communism. The nationalists, under Chiang Kai-shek, fled to Taiwan. They left China and went to Taiwan. Now, the thing about Mao Zedong and his party is their revolution happened at the perfect opportunity. It happened at a time period where China was struggling in World War II. Japan, as you could see by the highlighted portion on this map here, controlled most of China during this time period. And about this time, when the Communist Revolution was taking effect, Japan was being attacked by the United States in Japan, and so they were leaving China. And they were leaving it to the Chinese, and there was nobody there to help out Chiang Kai-shek because everybody else was fighting World War II. And Mao Zedong and his forces were able to force Chiang Kai-shek to Taiwan and exile him to Taiwan, and were able to establish communism because it all happened at the perfect opportunity. Japan's transformation. From 1890 to 1940, Japan used diplomacy and military force to build an empire. They built an empire in Taiwan, in the Koreas, and also parts of mainland Asia in China. Their expansion and their policy of expansion actually led to World War II, and they became one of the world's leading powers. And then after World War II, because the United States forces attacks on Japan, as you can see the picture here from the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan begins rebuilding after World War II and is a world power today. They developed and rebuilt very, very quickly. And they were able to control a lot of this region. One of the main reasons they reached out and tried to control this region was for natural resources, because Japan's a little island and they didn't have those, but the mainland Asia did. So they invaded that region. And then the Koreas. After World War II, North Korea, which is a communist government, invaded South Korea, which was a democratic government, in 1950. The United States policy at this time, they believed in the domino theory, that if one country fell to communism in Asia, that the rest would fall to communism. And so they told anybody and everybody that was combating and defending themselves against communism that they would help them out. And the United States did. We stepped in on the side of South Korea. We rushed to their defense. It all began at the 38th parallel, which is this latitude line here. And the whole war ends, really not the war, but the fighting ends at the 38th parallel as well. At one point, North Korea invaded South Korea, which brought the United States into the war. When the United States got into the war, they pushed the North Koreans back through North Korea and were about to invade into China when the United States president at the time said, yeah, maybe we ought to stop, because if we invade China, then we'll bring China into this war and we'll have a whole other problem on our hands. So they stopped and they pushed back under guidance from the United States president and Chinese forces, pushed back to the 38th parallel, which is where the whole thing began. And this zone today is referred to as a demilitarized zone, because the war officially was never over. There was never a peace that was signed. There's only a zone where there's a ceasefire, the demilitarized zone. And North Korea today has a totalitarian dictatorship under the Il's family, and you see them in the news all the time. And then, last but not least, Mongolia, a free Mongolia. Mongolia was under control of the Soviet Union until 1991. From about 1924 to 1991, the Soviet Union controlled Mongolia. In 1991, after the Soviet Union fell, Mongolia adopted a democratic constitution and is making progress towards a democracy today. Even though they're not very developed, they still have a lot of traditional culture in this region, as we'll see in our next section of notes.